This is the UC Hunting Properties Podcast, your home for all things recreational land. Our goal, to help you stand on your investment. Hey guys, on this week's episode, we're bringing you kind of a special guest, and I think that's pretty much overused, but this time it's not a real estate agent, it's not a real estate broker, it's our buddy Brad Harper from Harper Growing Solutions. This is a strategic alliance we're building with him and his company and his very, very wide and broad array of products. This is kind of a soup to nut service when it comes to all things agronomy, food plot, making your soil healthy, and honestly killing big bucks, because that's at the root of this. That's what drives his passion. So excited to have Brad in studio today, and we're going to dive into it. All right, welcome back to the UC Hunting Properties podcast. Like I mentioned, today's a special episode. We got Brad Harper in here with us today. We're going to run through kind of all things Harper Growing Solutions and who Brad is and where he's from and how he got the company to where it's at. But before we do that, I wanted to mention to all of our listeners, this is going to be a multi-phase or multi-episode thing that we're going to be doing with Brad. And I guess I'm saying thing because Brad and I started working together now, golly, probably close to a year ago. Chad Thielen got us introduced. But we're actually going to go from field with pulling soil samples today with Brad back to his analysis and recommendations, and then the real world application of using the products, the mixes, the blends to improve our soil, improve the crops we have on them regardless. And at the end of the day, I'm hoping I got a grip and grin picture to show everyone and put Brad's stamp on it. So without further ado, welcome to town, buddy.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Sounds like you've been on a long loop, huh?
Yeah, it's been about, probably 20 hours out of the last 26 in the truck, but we're hitting properties and taking samples.
Well, and that's what really impressed me, Brad, when you were like, we were putting a pretty substantial order together. And I was like, how's this going to work, Brad? Like, you just pull a trailer? Like, what do you do? And you're like, no, man, I'll literally rent a U-Haul, fill it up, and drive it right to your client's doorstep. I'm like, holy shit.
Absolutely. And that's what I like the U-Haul, because I'll beat up their stuff a little bit more.
No, one of my famous sayings is nothing parties like a rental, so I get it. But no, so Brad made a loop, loaded up, and, let's back up. I guess let's back up a little, Brad, because I want people to understand how this kind of evolved. Yep. So we were working with one of our land pros in Jason Small, that it's Land Pros, or United Country Land Pros. They're part of UC Hunting Properties, a very successful real estate firm out of northern Missouri. And actually they do business Missouri and in Iowa. But long story short, they introduced us to our client down there, Mark, because same thing, like he's a non-resident or absentee landowner, so he's from down south, and this is kind of his playground or hunting farm up here in northern Missouri. So we worked with Mark kind of from day one on the layout of his farm, the development of his farm, how we want it to hunt, where things are going to be, very consultative to help him through that process. Well, one of the things we did, and this is where I'm about to insert Harper Growing Solutions, one of the things we did was have him carve out a brand new, 3.5, 4 acre food plot, and it's dead smack in the middle of a hardwood forest.
It is nice, though.
It's beautiful. Dude, it's going to be an absolute slam dunk spot. But so last year, all of the development was done. The trail system was put in based on our plan. These food plots were in. Even this food plot rotation, we started to get into that. And I guess that's where I want to insert you, Brad, because Brad and I had a conversation about this property and what we were doing. And I got thinking about it, and I'm like, why am I not just kind of turning the keys over to Brad to help us with this entire thing, because it's a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
So all of that said, Brad was just down, met with our client down there. They toured the farm. They pulled more soil samples so that we kind of can create a baseline. But, Brad, I think people are now starting to see, when I say full service or Harper Growing Solutions is full service, I mean, literally it is.
We don't mess around.
Yeah, I like how you roll. But give us Brad, give us, talk to us about your background a little. Like, let our listeners understand how this whole thing kind of started, where you're from, who you are, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. No, my name is Brad Harper from Michigan. It all kind of started super young. I was farming with my dad, and then we started doing food plots probably when I was 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there.
And were you doing them commercially or for yourself or all of the above?
Just for ourselves. That's
okay.
how this all started. So with that being said, we were playing, get to experiment a lot, really learned a lot from a young age, taking that up. So as I was farming, it really all started when we started doing experiments and trials on the farm, trying to just see how we could do better, maybe make less passes.
Sure.
That's how it all started. So then as soon as I started kind of going down that rabbit hole of building soils, trying to get better yields, less passes, then we really started playing with different products. And then as I got into that 7-8 years, I had a couple guys come to me like, hey, you know more about these products than we do. We need you to start consulting for us.
Sure.
So we started doing that, and then because I just love food plots and hunting, I seen just a huge opportunity of, hey, we can transfer this right into the hunting thing because there's so many guys that are asking questions and not really knowing. I could really help guys out. So that's how that went.
I like that you're bringing that up because and this is kind of a conversation. I swear I have it multiple times a year, and I've had it probably 1,000 times over the last 20 years or whatever. But I always chuckle, when somebody kind of just uses like, oh, it's just a food plot. Oh, it's just a food plot. Mm-hmm. And I guess my argument's the plumb opposite of that. Like, listen, you're already limited. Like some guys have a half acre, some guys might have up to 10 acres, but in either case, you're limited. That is your food plot, and if you're getting return on your tillable or have it in CRP, obviously the last thing you want to do is pull return out of your farm to have food plots. You want to have both.
Yep.
So I guess I'm of the plumb opposite mindset, and I want to maximize every inch of that property that I can from a hunting perspective, which includes food plots.
Yep.
So I tell everyone the same thing. I'm like, listen, all food plots are is mini farming.
Yeah.
Right?
That's our cash crop is our fall food plots.
You got it. And can you get that turnip the size of a basketball? Like, guess what? That's more food, know? So it's funny, the mindset shift. I feel like even micronutrients and a lot of the bios that you see right now, like there's a gazillion of them out there.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very buzzy. But what's interesting to me is, I have a background on the agronomy side. And it's interesting because that has really trended up the last, I'm going to say 5 years.
Big time.
And it's really taken hold in the real ag world. And that's what I always tell everyone. I'm like, I don't care if there's a deer on the bag and it's beans and it's corn, it's whatever. Whatever you're planting. I'm like, there's nobody doing it better than good producers in the real world. Mm-hmm. Farmers making a living. And it's a big difference between 40 bushel soybeans and 80 bushel soybeans.
For sure.
Or 150 bushel corn and 250 bushel corn.
Yeah. No, and it's kind of funny because you got some of the universities that seem like they're a few years behind of this technology. You got some farmers that are right up there like hammering it out.
Pushing it, yep.
But then you got some farmers that are a few years behind the universities, and then a lot of guys that I'm seeing, the food plot guys are 10 years behind. So it's like, hey, we got a lot of catching up we can do. There's a lot of cool things, a lot of technology that we can really help out.
Absolutely.
And push that to the limit.
Especially, and I think it's even more important because oftentimes food plots are happening in areas that aren't even productive enough to truly be a tillable field.
That's half of where they're going. Or it's, hey, that's just an open spot in the woods. Let's try to grow something there.
You got it.
It's like, well, it's open for a reason.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to steal your thunder there.
No,
but
you're fine.
I do think it's important because now I almost see the pendulum swinging plumb the opposite way. And there's lots of companies out there doing similar things to what we're going to talk about today. But the reality is most of this is education. And as soon as a landowner understands what's capable and maybe what they should be doing, I tell everyone it's the same amount of work to do it wrong as it is to do it right. Let's do it right. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I didn't mean to steal your thunder, but continue. I want to know all about Harper Growing Solutions, where this thing came from.
Yeah, you're good. So that's kind of how that started. So as soon as I was like, hey, we can help these food plot guys out, let's go down that road and start playing with it. too. I mean, who doesn't like that? Food
Right.
plots, deer hunting.
Yeah. Amen.
So it started doing that, and it just took off. So we've been kind of chasing our tails the last few years, just blowing this thing up. And
Right.
the website went nuts, a lot of podcasts, YouTubes. It's all growing great. So we're just kind of cranking it out.
Chipping along.
Yep.
Yep.
That's definitely a mile high view, but feel like there's enough details there to kind of really help guys out and understand.
What's your personal or professional, I guess, however you want to say it, Brad? Like, what is your background? I mean, outside of, you're a farm kid, grew up doing food plots. Tell us a little bit about Brad Harper.
You could say farmer forever. And then as soon as I started really starting those trials and everything, I was probably 21, I think, for that. Well, that'd be the last 13 years. It's just been every single agronomy meeting, every single, farm meeting I can go to, just really hammering down every single class.
Yep.
And I've had a lot of good mentors, and a lot of the companies we work with do a really good job with education. So that's where really understanding these soil samples and how to go about that.
How do you interpret them, yeah.
Correct. So that last 13, 14 years has just been crazy with all this information, a lot of books, and just hammering all that stuff out just to learn as much as I could, because then in turn I can relay that information over.
Right.
So a lot of guys kind of call me the middleman, the translator, because I take a lot of the scientific stuff, and because I still am a farmer at heart, I can translate that to understand what's going on.
When I was teeing up your visit to Mark's farm, I straight up told him, I said, I don't know how to explain this other than I'm like, Brad's a dirt nerd.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, this is his world, this is his language. I'm like, he loves this stuff.
Yeah, and as I'm kind of explaining like a little bit of what our products do and how they work, we're just standing in the food plot, and he's sitting there like jaw dropped, just like, I don't know what you just said, but I'll trust you.
Yeah.
Well, I get it.
Well, and I guess that's one thing I do want our listeners to understand is, realistically speaking, you could be a transactional seed business like everybody else, and you put your package together and it says, oh, this is my fall green blend, and of course they could plant it and it's probably going to grow. Mm-hmm. But I guess the thing I want people to truly understand is, if you start with a soil sample and Brad and his team are interpreting it, they're going to come back to you not just with the results of the soil sample, it's the results and it's their special recipe. And I guess I'm going to kind of let you take it from there, Brad, because I want to talk in layman's terms so people understand literally how you become the easy button on their properties.
Correct. I think that's huge, because no one else really does it like that. And that's where I seen like, hey, we can really help people out this way. So as soon as we take the soil sample, whether I do it or they do it, and send it into the lab, we get the results back. Then I take that, figure out, hey, what was growing in there last? What do you want to grow? A lot of the times, like with Mark, I'm looking at, hey, where's your early season stuff? How are them deer moving through here throughout the season? Because then we can lay that out. We want certain crops here. We want certain crops here. So then we're looking at the soil sample and teaming up with that to put the final plan together.
And maybe even on top of that, I mean, obviously you're into supplemental feed and minerals and stuff. So I don't want to even go down that curve yet. But I do want people to understand that it's kind of a soup to nuts approach on, hey, here's where you're at. This is your baseline first soil sample. Here's our special sauce recipe. Mm-hmm. Start applying this. And then I don't know. I mean, is it in every other year? Is it in every third year? You revisit the soil sample, again, check the oil level. Where are we at?
Yep.
And then just continuously tweak, because I think I'll speak for me personally. I mean, I'm stoked about, making this a multi-episode or multi-phase interview or of sorts, I guess, with Harper Growing Solutions on my own property, because I do feel I even know how to interpret a soil sample probably better than an average person. Mm-hmm. But in the same, like a lot of these micros and all the bios that are going on, like, dude, there's a zillion of them.
It's crazy.
And where it actually is applicable versus where it's not, that's where I'm going to lean on you guys,
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to sit here and say, hey, man, my food plots are top notch, or I'm top 2% in the country or whatever. I'm saying that just based on more experience than anything. I know what my stuff looks like, and it's, you know what I mean?
Yep.
But it doesn't mean we couldn't be better. And I guess that's probably what I'm the most excited about is I pulled samples on every one of these multiple times years past. Mm-hmm. And I think I fall into the same God, I hate to say farmer mentality, but like, yeah, man, you look at your NP and K. If it's going to be corn or brassicas, guess what? We're going to put a lot more nitrogen there because they're pigs, right? They need the nitrogen. On the flip side, if I know something's going into beans, yeah, pour the potash to it. You know what I mean? Yep. So like I said, I'm guilty because it's go fast, go fast, go fast. And I can call up to the co-op and have them put a buggy of fertilizer together for me. But I've learned through the years, like, I don't even tell them it's a food plot anymore.
Oh, yeah.
I literally say,
can't.
no, I literally, I'm like, I need 10 acres. It's going on corn. My target's 260 bushel. And they're like, holy, you know, and I'm like, I don't care if I got to take a double pass with the buggy. I'm like, that's what I want. I want you to double the potash. Or potash, sulfur is what I meant to say.
Yep.
And it's funny because it's to the point now where they don't even question it, you know, but they're like, I can't believe this idiot spending, you know, $2,000 on this buggy for a food plot. But the reality is, like I said, I want to have better crops than the real farmer next door.
Correct.
I want to be the last man standing with food.
Yep. No, for sure. And that's where it starts. Take that soil sample. You know, we look at what crops are where. I'll put that recommendation together, you know, this much of this much of that. We lay it out super easy, like, here, on this plot, this is what you got.
Yep.
Here's what we're planting, go there. Just break that down across that whole farm. And then, like you were saying, kind of start to finish. And then it's like, okay, they're bedding here. Let's throw a mineral site here. And then that way they're going to come to this staging plot. We're going to put this crop in there because of that with this soil sample. Just work all that out with those guys. And that's just kind of how I didn't like when I was doing food plots. You had to go over here for seed. You had to go over here for fertilizer. Go get these trees here, these trees. I'm like, that's dumb. That don't make no sense.
Right.
So that's where it was like, how can we help guys the most? And that was, let's be the one-stop shop. I already have my own nursery anyways. We were already doing that for how many years?
Yeah.
Like, let's just do a few more and sell them. I mean, it worked out great, and everybody loved that. I'm going to go there and get everything I need, and I'm all set for the whole year.
Well, and like I said, even I don't even know how long it's been since I've been doing food plots before they were cool.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, and it was all for hunting, or you know to make me a better hunter, I guess, and take care of these animals. But you are so right when you say it's a very segmented thing, right? And somebody that's not familiar with farming in general, it's almost intimidating, right? Like, how do you do a food plot? What are the steps? And I don't even know how many different forums and pages and whatever I follow on social media, you know, about different food plotting groups and whatever. And I just chuckle because it's like every year they recycle the same questions. And I always got to just kind of tap myself and be like, dude, you were there once. You know, I mean, I remember as a long time ago, but I bet when I was 16, the first food plot I ever put in, I attempted to till with a hand tiller, mind you, like standing CRP, like brome grass. Holy shit.
Hang on.
Yeah, dude. And I didn't even conceptually understand back then, like, hey, kill it with a weed killer, let it die, and then go, right? So like I said, guilty as charged, but like, I think about that, and I think what's missing is the education and the easy button.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong. I don't want anyone to think doing food plot right is easy. But once you know, and that's where I'm like, I'm leaning on Brad, you know, and I would consider myself a pretty experienced food plotter.
Well, that's right. I think it just was the perfect recipe with farming for so long. We already had all the herbicides, the surfactants, all the additives. We already had that knowledge, and then started doing food plots for 20 years now. It's like, have that knowledge, because how many times long time ago that you go just throw something out and nothing happens.
Right.
Well, what happened? Figure that out and work through the steps to where now it's just way advanced, and there's a lot more technology. And
there's a zillion good YouTube videos on, I don't know, I would call it best practices, I guess. And some of that's very opinionated, and
there's almost too many where you start overwhelmed. Well, what do I go? This
Who's
guy's
right?
telling me this, he's telling me that. Exactly. We get a lot of that.
Yeah, we had a podcast a while back with our buddy Slade Priest. He's a rock star realtor.
Dude from down south?
Yeah, hunting land man. And Slade and I were talking about, that we've moved for our personal corn plots. We put them in at 15-inch rows. And the reason being is a deer will not disappear. Let me back up. A big buck doesn't disappear into 15-inch corn like you see them do with 30-inch, right? Like they walk in and it's like they're gone because they can stay in that row. And I said, dude, they don't like banging into stuff, you know? So I'm like, they will stay on the edges and or wherever you put an opening. And it was a cool conversation with Slade because that dude's as serious as anybody, you know, when it comes to food plotting. But I'm like, you know, now it's even to the point where we'll direct the traffic with our rows. So where we want them to come in is where they're coming in. Where we want them feeding when they're feeding, you know, we can control that.
Yep.
And like I tell everyone, I'm like, if you pay attention in a row crop, 90% of the time when that animal stops to eat, they're actually using the row. So I'm like, now you need to manipulate your food plot so the rows line up with making that animal, or I shouldn't say making, but more often than not, that animal will end up broadside because they're going to be with the row, not walking against the grain.
Correct.
And it's like, oh, maybe that doesn't matter. And I'm like, well, I'll tell you what, when you got 2 minutes of light, it's going to matter because now the animal by default should be at a proper angle to take an ethical shot.
Yep.
So it's funny, like, I'll go full nerd on the hunting stuff, but like I want to do the same on the soil health and the micros and everything that goes into this. And that's why when I really dove in and understood what you guys are doing, I'm like, this is actually badass. And I think our first conversation was about liquid lime.
Yep. That's how it all started.
So let's talk about that a little because same thing. I mean, I think there's a lot of companies slinging products, and I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but they're definitely not all created equal.
No, and I won't use names, but a lot of the products in the food plot industry, it's interesting because they were in the farm industry 5-10 years ago and they failed, and it was almost like, let's do a second go in the food plot side and throw a lot of marketing dollars at it, and they're not doing too bad. But now every time on social media you see more and more guys like, oh, that's there's just calcium chloride.
Yeah, there's some naysayers.
That's not going to raise pH, and it's like, that's not. Calcium chloride is just calcium. So that will help your calcium levels, but now you have the baggage of chloride, so it's not great. But that's how that all got started because of that. There is a lot of confusion in there of actual calcium carbonate as liquid lime products, and that's what's actually going to raise your pH. So that's exactly right. That's how we got started. And I mean, that's a deep dive in itself. You know, we can sit 100%. Here and talk about that for a long time.
And I'm saying, let's keep it. Okay, I'm going to back up and we're going to come forward because what I guess what I want to get out of this discussion about liquid lime, right, is how it's applicable to the guy that doesn't have the means to get a commercial buggy in there with true ag lime. Because I don't want to, I guess I'm not trying to set the precedence that liquid lime replaces, you know, call it your standard ag lime. I think they all have their place. But that's what I want you to kind of explain to people is liquid lime isn't just a crutch. Like, it's a maintenance tool.
Correct. And that's perfect. Now, if we can get a buggy in and he's not too far from a mine or something like that, we always check prices to make sure. But that's where if we can get something there, that's fine. Great. We can supplement with liquid if we need to, because liquid is going to be a super fast, get your pH up, get it where it needs to be. But because of that, it's also not long-lasting like ag lime. You know, ag lime's going to be 6 to 18 months before it fully reacts and gets your pH up. But then it's also going to last that much longer.
Right.
So Mark's, for example, he can't get a buggy up on top there. He's going to have to supplement with liquid. But we see more and more people wanting to go the liquid fertilizer route, so they're spraying anyways. So now for them to do ag lime, that's an extra trip. I'll just throw everything in one spray tank and go. Well, now we just saved them guys a trip, or, you know, who knows, maybe a couple grand. It's hard to say. So,
and I'm trying to relate this back to like a real world scenario, right? So in my mind, a ton or 2,000 pounds per acre of ag lime, I think most people would tell you can move your pH by a point once that takes hold.
On sandy soils.
Yep. Okay, because that's going to leach faster, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and that's where in 1 ton of ag lime, on average, you can look up a bunch of different mines in the university studies. There's anywhere from 6 to 18 pounds of calcium carbonate in 1 ton.
Okay.
And that 6 to 18 pounds is what's making the reaction in the whole ton of lime.
So that's the magic.
You're spreading that whole ton for that 6 to 18 pounds.
Okay.
That's it. So our liquid lime is a 14-pound gallon.
Okay.
So 14 pounds of calcium carbonate. And when you pick that thing up, you know it.
Right.
But that's why we can say that.
Okay.
So when we look at that, it's, that's kind of equivalent.
So,
but it all depends on CEC and a couple other things that we look at.
Organic material, how it's going to take the calcium in the first place,
Correct.
Right? So if we were just to use a generic recommendation, right? No soil sample, and or even if there is a soil sample and you're off a point, you're trying to go from 6 to 7 or 5.5 to 6.5 or whatever, right? So in the ag world, they'd say, hey, you need 2,000 pounds of lime on that acre to get your desired result, right?
Yep.
And again, we're not even talking about how long that desired result takes.
Correct.
Shift gears with me, Brad. In your world with your product, your liquid lime, how many gallons are we talking for that same acre of your 14% versus that 2,000 pounds of granular lime?
I'm going to say on average, without anything else, just on average, we're looking at probably 2 gallons.
Okay, so 2 gallons of your product put into a sprayer, mixed with water, and obviously distributed across the food plot is basically equal to a ton of traditional lime.
Correct. And that's where I think we can really kick the co-op's butt, because I'm looking at the crop and a couple other numbers on soil samples, and they might say 2,000 pounds just as a generic wildlife food plot, they call it.
I think it is. I think a ton of lime per acre is a very generic
Absolutely.
fix.
Yep. So depending on what he's growing and some other numbers on that soil sample, we might not have to get to 7.
Right.
So, hey, you don't need that. Let's just go with 1 gallon. Run that out. That's going to get you plenty good.
Yep.
We don't need any more.
Yep.
Perfect. That's
Now,
where we can really customize.
I want to touch on that too, because I think in some people's mind it's like cost prohibitive. And I'm going to probably argue the opposite, because ag lime is cheap. As a general rule of thumb, ag lime's cheap.
Yep.
But what's a gallon of your liquid lime cost a consumer?
$54 a gallon.
That's where I'm going with this.
So that's why I said sometimes we can save them money, depending on how far, and they got to pay the lime buggy to come all the way out there and stuff,
Right.
compared to throwing that in a 25-gallon tank and going and spraying it.
Well, and even if you're just calculating your time, at $54 an acre, even if it's 100, even if a guy's running, 2
gallons, $108. I know.
I think you'd be hard pressed. Like by the time you factor time and diesel and a tractor, and even pissing with the buggy or getting someone there.
Well, that's not even going into the fact that you then has to still go back and spread fertilizer.
Correct.
So now we can mix all that in one.
Yep.
Make one pass.
Yep. Life is good.
Yeah, and that's not even getting into the depths of the fertilizer, which we can go there next. But that's where.
Well, we're gonna go there.
That's perfect. That's where it's really not even apples to apples. But we do. I still tell guys, hey, you're at 4.3 heavy soils. You can get a lime truck there. Go for it.
Yeah. There's no downside to it.
No, it's not bad. We can still supplement with liquid, because you're going to have to. If you're at 4.3, ag lime is not going to get that up this spring or this fall.
4.3, you got a problem. Like, your ground sucks.
I just looked at 2 samples in the last, on my drive here. We looked at 2 samples, and there was one 4.3 and one was 4.6.
I'm going to go on record right now, Brad. I'm going to roll the dice a little. You're not going to pull a sample today out of this Iowa black dirt that I put food plots on that's going to be under 6.
Oh, I bet.
I'd even take a side bet on it.
Yeah.
But,
no, one was Michigan and one was Georgia. Just pine country, sandy, just junk.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You got a lot of work to do, boss, and we'll get there. But
and I think it's funny because I've even dabbled with food plots where walnut trees are super, prevalent.
Yep.
And it's crazy how acidic them little devils are. So, you got to factor that kind of stuff in. It's not just about pine trees. I mean, walnut trees are acidic as hell.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
yeah, there's a lot to it.
Okay, so thank you for having the lime conversation, because I kind of wanted to – I don't think people understand that fully, and that's what I was trying to –
Yeah, and I just think the biggest thing to look at is in ag lime, it's calcium carbonate. The carbonate is what's making that reaction, not chloride. So that's one thing, and we get that question all the time.
Yeah.
That's probably the most asked question.
Gotcha. So 14 pounds is equivalent – or sorry – What did you say?
Yep.
Your product is the equivalent of the same 14 pounds of the actual calcium carbonate you'd be getting out of a ton
of ag
lime.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's a soundbite. Like, that alone needs to be a reel because people are oblivious.
Correct. And that product's been on the ag side for a long time.
Yep.
And it's just like cranking that out on the ag side, because why wouldn't you? If you can mix that in with your fertilizers, save farmers a trip.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good one because lime to me, or pH, let me just put it that way, getting your pH right, typically with lime, I think that's probably one of the most overlooked steps.
Mm-hmm.
And I relate it back to the fact that it's work, right?
Yeah.
You're dealing with a lot of product to make a change. And
yeah.
that's where I think this liquid lime thing has me all enthralled. And I've used some of these products in the past, but I've never truly started like we're gonna and go, okay, here's my baseline, here's what we're gonna do, here's the result.
Yep.
So it'll be fun to dabble with this.
No, yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah. So we touched on lime. Walk us through. Obviously, yes, you have a lime product. I want you to touch on the liquid calcium, because I think same thing from a supplemental perspective. People need to understand that. Mm-hmm. And then let's touch on your foliar fertilizers and how do people use that? Like, again, real world application. Yep. How does this fit into what they're doing?
Yeah, perfect. So calcium to start off with, calcium's huge. The roots need calcium, the soil needs calcium, the plants need calcium.
Yep.
It's huge. So when I look at that soil sample, there are a bunch of times where I'm like, hey, let's just go with 4 ounces, because our calcium is protected. Not to go too crazy into chemistry, but most granular and conventional fertilizers, those charges on those nutrients are not protected. So that's why you get, like, you go throw out a bunch of phosphorus or triple 19, and next year your soil sample, all of a sudden your phosphorus is through the roof.
Yep.
Well, that's because that's not protected, and it gets tied up in the soil.
So it's basically unusable nutrients that exist.
Unusable for now. It's going to take a while for them to break that down. Yep. And then slowly become available to plants.
Sure.
So that kind of ties in our calcium and all of our fertilizers, because that conversation is now out of the picture. All of our nutrients are protected. So when we put a gallon of our fertilizer down, a gallon is available.
It's all available.
All available. If you put 100 pounds of conventional fertilizer down, on average, maybe 10%. And you can see that correlating with soil samples year to year, because those numbers keep going up.
Yep.
So that's why you need to put down 300 pounds of a nutrient, just because you're hoping to get that 10% to the plants across that acre.
Isn't that crazy?
It's nuts. And that's what, when we talk about a lot of our stuff and the conversations that we have, guys are like, I don't get that. That don't make sense. And it's like, well, you don't have a briefcase cell phone no more, do you? We got fancy phones. That technology has changed so much, and that's why we can have these new fertilizers and these new technologies in order, so that way we do have a gallon of lime that's equivalent to a ton, or we do have a fertilizer that's a gallon an acre, something like that.
Yeah.
That's how that progressed. So it's really interesting and pretty cool how they can do that now.
Well, and I think even just the understanding of, like to your point, you were getting into CEC and organic material, and the fact that if your soil health isn't proper, oftentimes that's why, a synthetic fertilizer isn't as effective as it should be.
100%.
Because your soil's not doing what your soil should be doing to break it down and use it.
Yep. And that's perfect. It'll lead me right into that fertilizer. So
yeah,
conventional fertilizers are all salt-based, right? Well, what does salt do for our biology in the soil?
Coach us. Talk to us.
It inhibits it. So we salt meat to get rid of it, right?
Yeah.
So when we're adding salt every time, well, yeah, we're taking a step forward because we're getting a bunch of nutrients there, but we're also taking a step backwards because we're screwing up the biology in our soil. So with our fertilizer being carbon-based, now we're not only helping the biology, we're helping the...
It just sounds technical because you say carbon-based, just saying.
It's a what?
I said it just sounds technical.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when carbon arrows became a thing.
That's right.
Like, shit, it's just cool because it's carbon.
I
don't even know what that means.
And that's a big buzzword now, but it's just carbon-based. So plants are using carbon, the biology is using carbon, the soil's using carbon.
Yeah.
So why would we put something down that actually screws up the soil compared to something that helps it? Plain and simple.
Yeah.
And that's a huge reason of everything that we're allowed to do, as far as how can you get away with only a gallon an acre? That's why.
Yeah.
That's a huge reason why. And that's why over time A guy might start out with 2 gallons of fertilizer an acre. Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years later, when he runs some cover crops and we're building that soil, he only needs a 1 gallon because we built that soil.
Eventually, you get yourself into just a maintenance mode,
Correct.
right? Yeah.
And that's where the foliar comes into play. So a lot of the times we're taking that fertilizer, maybe we're 1 or 2 gallons up front on the soil, help that out, and then a lot of the times 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks later, especially on beans, on brassicas, we can come back and do that foliar application with maybe a quart, maybe a pint. Just get that right into the leaf. We're not dealing with the soil at all. We don't need rain to wash it in.
You're feeding the plant.
Directly. And it's just such a nice thing. It's right in, make that change right away, help that plant get a nice boost. It just works awesome.
Shift gears with us for a second, Brad, and I want to at least touch on bios at a high level.
Yep.
Because I think same thing. I think that's a very misunderstood segment of agronomy.
Yep.
But I also think it's probably the most trendy or fastest growing segment. And as far as I understand it, and by no means am I the expert, but I don't think there's a lot of regulation around bios right now. So it's kind of like the Wild West with a lot of the, the big companies dabbling into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to say it, but I also think that's why some of the stuff kind of gets labeled as snake oil, whether it is or whether it isn't.
Correct. So,
because, bios, by and large,
how do I do this without
organisms.
getting a lot of letters sent to my house?
Yeah.
So there's a couple ways to look at it, and there's a ton of products out there. Out of all the stuff that we've dabbled in on the farm side, it kind of comes down to only a few different companies really having their stuff together.
Okay.
And the way I look at it is if we're trying to put biology out on our soils, A, if it's not native, or B, if it's not there, there's a reason for that. So if that's not native, you can't just add it.
Sure.
That's just not going to happen, right? It's not there for a reason.
Right.
So if you add it, then they just die because they can't live in that environment. But what happens, and this is why they can get away with it, when those, let's just say bacteria.
Bugs.
Yep, bugs in a jug. When that bacteria dies, they actually become what's called secondary metabolites. The biology that's native and living in that soil, that's what they eat.
Sure.
So as plant matter is getting broke down, as carbon is getting broke down, it becomes secondary metabolites.
Food.
Yeah. So when you put that on, even though it's not really upping the amount of biology you have in your soil, or maybe you're not increasing the number of different families of microbes, well, you're just still feeding what's there already. So you might put it out and you're like, oh, that worked great. Oh, I got so much biology there. And it's like, well, no, you just gave them fast food is what you did, and it helped. So there's a lot of them that are going to help and work, but then there's also a few of them where they can actually make a little bit bigger difference. And without going too far deep in the weeds, I think that description really hopefully will help open some eyes and explain that a little bit.
One, like I said, I think some people go, hey, it's dirt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And years ago, somebody said, hey, man, if you can't take a scoop out of your food plot, flip it over, and there's like literally worms, and I'm not saying everywhere, but like wormholes in the soil, worms moving around in your dirt, you got bad dirt.
Yeah.
And that was a farmer telling me this because his argument was, like pulling smoke, pulling anhydrous, it kills a lot of the bio stuff happening in the soil.
For sure.
And over time, you basically just have blank dirt.
Yep.
And it's not healthy. So I wanted to touch on bios for a second because I think, I don't know either, Brad, like, what the hell are we going to be talking about in 5 years? I'm sure something else.
Yeah.
But even sulfur, seems like it was something that just really hit the forefront in the last couple of years as a micro. And now it's like, the most important thing to grow in corn. We have a sulfur deficiency, and Christ, we used to get acid rain and we don't get that anymore. And I'm like, I don't know if any of that's true, but like there's definitely a correlation with higher sulfur rates, especially right about when that corn's going to tassel. Boy, if you give that corn some sulfur over the top, it just goes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think the biggest thing is not too long ago, we can now measure in parts per trillion, right? So before we didn't
Which is crazy to even think about.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So before we didn't even know what was going on here or there, and now they can literally take plant tissue and measure in that crazy amount, and they say, oh, well, we add X amount of sulfur, whether that be 1 part per million or 2 parts per million. Well, now they can measure that and see how that translates into
the actual tissue of the plant.
Yeah, and yield. And now because they can measure in that, there's a lot of things happening in the farm industry right now.
Dude was telling me, and I haven't seen this nor have I researched it. Maybe you're familiar, Brad, but he was telling me about an actual portable device that literally can go into the field, and I don't know if it's cutting the plant or like legitimately x-raying like a leaf, whether it's a soybean or whether it's corn, but they can literally on the fly basically do a tissue sample and have those kind of results, and they're doing it to test the effectiveness of different bios that they're putting on these things over the top, and same thing with some of the micros coming over the top. And the one I keep hearing about, of course, is sulfur and boron. But I think even like trace zinc and, some of these micros. And I'm like, this is nuts. But in the same, they have all the evidence and like true case studies on sulfur applied over the top of corn right about when it's tasseling is when that plant is like sulfur deficient.
Correct.
And it's when it needs it.
Yep. And that is another thing of kind of like our foliar system. We're going to do that foliar and like spoon feed that plant.
Yep.
Give it what it needs when it needs it. That's huge. So going back to your thing, like if you look around V8, V10, it's hot out.
Yep.
Those plants are stressed. We normally go out on the farm side with a little bit of calcium and a little bit of silicon, and we've seen a huge, like 20 bushel bump on average.
Yeah.
We're doing that
20
every single
bushel
year.
is crazy.
Yep. With 1 quart of that product. Every single year we've done that with Beck seeds like 6 years in a row.
Sure.
And it's just right at that time when it's hot, if you take tissue samples when it's hot, you'll see that calcium level just plummet.
Yeah.
The plant's using it up. So you're like, I
It's
just
fighting.
put calcium out, and now it's low. And it's like, well, that's because it's literally using it at that time. And when you talk about sulfur is there for protein synthesis in the plant. So as you're feeding these micros, all of that is basically taking stress away from that plant. So if that plant's not having to spend its resources fixing this or fixing that and dealing with that stress, all those resources then go to work together in order to bump that yield.
So talk to me about that. I guess I am going to go down this rabbit hole a little, because I'm curious on what my understanding is. Even if you have sulfur in your dirt, right? You can be running it in furrow, or it came on as a granular and it got tilled into the dirt. My understanding is even if your sulfur is good at a soil level, it doesn't necessarily translate perfectly through the roots into the plant because, again, the plant's working harder.
Correct.
Where if you're putting it on the leaf material and it's getting to, photosynthesize or whatever, it's substantially more.
You could say that with every nutrient, really.
As long as it's on the plant and the plant can take it in.
Yeah, you could go and when you do foliar applications, and that's why those are so effective. We're taking out everything that's happening below ground.
Yeah.
We're just not dealing with it at all. I mean, that plant's doing so many things at once. If we're just going and giving it right to it, spoon feeding it right through the leaf, and it's getting in there right away,
Yep.
You could say that with just about every nutrient just because, boom, it's right there.
It's readily
right
available.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious because I didn't know if, is it by default we're bringing it over the top because obviously now it's canopied. You can't get something into the dirt, let's call it. Or if there was more to it than that. That's why I asked.
Yeah, well, too, when you go, let's say, a granular application, if you go throw that out, okay, well, now that needs to get washed in. Now that needs to get broke down. Now that plant needs to signal for that, hey, I need sulfur. How long does that take compared to just going out and spraying it, putting it right in?
Yeah.
So
basically
there's a huge,
handing it to it. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Sugars. I want to talk about sugars.
Okay.
Opinion. What's your thought on literally, and people are probably thinking we're nuts, but there are foliar feeds that are heavy in, it's basically sugar water.
Yeah, there's a ton of guys that literally spray molasses.
Yeah.
And they're just feeding it sugar. So that's basically what it breaks down to. Photosynthesis breaks everything down, and it's running sugars and amino acids, and that's how that plant's functioning. So a lot of the times with those type of products, they're just thinking they can skip all those steps, and that works. Now, like with ours with the carbon, if we're giving it carbon, we're giving it a bunch of amino acids, we're just basically taking the stress away from that plant so then it can just function better and make its own sugars because molasses It's not like that plant's just going to chew on a bunch of molasses
Right.
and actually use it as that.
Right.
So that's kind of our thought. Like, let's give the plant what it needs, everything else, and it's going to do and make what it needs to make, whether that be a bunch of different sugars or alcohols that we can go down that huge list. But
Yeah.
that's kind of our thought. But no, people do that.
I mean, I think it's a fairly common practice.
Yeah.
Okay, so I kind of feel like we beat the foliar stuff and the liquid lime and the calcium and coming over the top. Good stuff. I love it, right? Brad, take a second and talk us through the other product you have readily available. And we can go down, seed, food plot seed, giant miscanthus. I mean, you got a whole shit pile of stuff. So I guess to get you introduced to our listeners, I want them to understand everything you guys dabbled into, at least at a high level.
Yep. So touching on all those fertilizers, on top of that, we do have a liquid nitrogen. And the biggest thing with liquid nitrogen, because that is fairly readily available from a lot of co-ops, the biggest thing was...
Well, I think people would say, hey, I hit it with some 32, and that's what they're talking about.
28%.
You got it.
And my biggest thing was I didn't really care about that because those are readily available. You can go almost anywhere and drive a half hour, an hour, and get 32 or 28%.
Yep.
I wanted something that guys could do a foliar with because, again, I want to get that just a little boost to the plant, and it's ammonium sulfate base, so therefore don't have to worry about burning. I mean, how many times have you...
So AMS layman's term, right?
Ammonium sulfate.
Yes. Yep. I'm just throwing it out there.
No, thank you. So how many times have you heard guys that went out and spread urea on brassicas, because that's what everybody says to do?
Yep.
Oh, we didn't get that rain we were supposed to, and now my brassica crop is all burned up.
And all their urea went into the air.
Yep.
Yeah.
So now it's gone, and so it volatilized and burned those plants. So that's why I wanted that special product. So we built that product specifically as a foliar to tag team with our main fertilizer as a foliar application.
Yeah.
So we can do that on corn. We can do that on switch.
Basically, you can bring it over anything.
Everything.
Yeah. And not worry about burning it.
Yep. That was the biggest thing. So we have that as well. Our other product that we use on the food plots, trees also, is our Deer Detour product.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is kind of the opposite. But
yep.
Yeah, I mean,
so I had so many guys with half acre, quarter acre, just little kill plots in the woods, and they wanted to grow brassicas. Well, that's not going to work. You got high deer numbers. They're just going to get pounded. Or you're trying to grow a half acre of soybeans somewhere. It's just going to get hammered. You can't do that.
I've always had a general rule, and I can't speak to all areas like you can, but I mean, like our deer density here is crazy, right? Crazy. And that was always my rule of thumb. If you're less than 2 acres, don't even attempt to have a soybean plot because you won't have one.
Correct.
You'll have a bunch of eating plants and stems is what you'll have.
And then you'll be going and planting in the fall again.
You got it. Yep.
So we were looking at the cost of fence. You got to go there, put it up. You got another day taking it down. So
at least.
Oh, yeah. It's a chore.
Damn right.
So when we were looking at that and putting that together, it was like, hey, we can use this as a foliar application. Go spray this once, twice, 3 times. You can control it without having the extra work of doing that. So when guys are at their property, maybe they're checking cameras. Oh, shoot, hey, there is some deer out there. Let's go spray it. You go spray that once, and then maybe they're doing that again in August. Go spray it again.
Well,
you have the option.
Talk us through that a little, because I'm curious, and I've kind of been down the path quite a few different ways. You know what I mean? All the way to the 3 strands of electric hot wire, staged so a deer looks at it and freaks out and won't jump it. I've used I guess what I would consider the reflective ribbon, like electric fence tape.
Yep.
But when it shakes in the wind, it kind of makes a weird sound, and it's like a real visual weird thing. And I've even sprayed, deterrent on that to try to hit every sense, right? Like now it's, it's sight, it's noise. They're smelling something they don't like. And I'll be honest, it was pretty effective.
Yep.
But I'm just curious, and I've even used it's a granular fertilizer.
Plant skid?
No. Milorganite, yes. And same thing, like I would give Milorganite a vote on it definitely is a deterrent, and it's natural. I think it's actually like a byproduct of like wastewater treatment plants, right? Yeah, so kind of weird, but definitely worked, and I noticed it, and you're giving, your plants a little bit of nitrogen, right? It's fertilizer. So I've kind of tried it all on like what is the best method, and then I obviously bumped into your product, the Deer Detour. I'm curious. So like if and we're gonna do this year, so you're gonna have to eat these words, Brad, if you fail.
Which we have.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna lie about that.
No,
We have.
and that's why I'm so curious about this, because if I can get away from the fence and know, hey, every 30 days I'm going to go out and, literally ring the perimeter 20 yards or whatever, my food plots, and it will keep deer off it. Talk to me about the science behind that, the mix. Like, what makes your product different than any other pure, deer repellent?
Yeah, so there's a smell factor, and that's where that's kind of the first line of defense, right?
Yeah.
Smell factor. So they smell that, doesn't smell good, they don't like that. And then there's a taste factor.
So it actually does change the taste of, say, a soybean leaf.
Big time.
Okay.
And the main reason and where we failed, when there's no other food around, like I got guys up in New York where they're like, the nearest ag field's literally 40 miles away. They're up in the mountains. I'm like, oh, well, no, that ain't going to work, boss.
Good luck.
Yeah. Or if you got a little kill plot way back off the road, we have failed there. And I think that's where, when there's nothing else like super close and super readily available, I think they just choke it up and get past it.
Yeah.
And that's where you don't have a choice. You got to bring in a big, huge deer fence and just fence it off.
Right.
But a lot of those other areas, we're able to cut that out because we can have that smell factor, we can have that taste factor. And if you just got a neighbor with some soybeans, beautiful. He's not going to eat yours because.
Right.
And the biggest thing is if we can throw off their pattern initially and get them in the habit of going right across that fence line to the neighbors,
agree with. Yes.
then that's huge. So that's something normally what we'll do, like with soybeans, when we plant, we'll go and spray the perimeter with that right away because we want it on tissue.
Yep.
On the soil, it doesn't really do that much. But so if we can cover,
so it needs to be hitting the plant, period.
If we can cover all that foliage on the outside of that plot initially and get that there and steer them away, get them to go find another food source.
So how soon are we talking, Brad? I mean, are these soybeans up out of the ground?
Nope. I like to do it the day we plant.
Literally, it's planted, and now you're bringing this over immediately before they even start popping, 3 days, 4 days later.
And we're spraying the outside, so everything on the outside. So if you think about a food plot in the woods, you got a 3-acre bean plot that you run.
Yep.
Like Mark's bottom.
Yep.
We're going to go spray all the bushes and all the trees and all the weeds all the way around the outside, and we're going to get that smell there and get that taste there, and we're just going to detour them over somewhere else. Break that pattern and get them going there, and then they're going to get used to that. So then
there's something to that, yeah.
Then,
I like that.
A lot of the times what guys will do is they'll wait 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then they'll come back and spray it directly on the crop.
And at that point, you're probably bringing your first pass of herbicide.
Correct. The biggest thing, though, was if we can just get past that first, second leaf stage of that bean, or with brassicas, if we can get past that first couple weeks, at least if they eat it, that plant's not toast.
Correct.
That was the biggest thing.
Yep.
The second thing where guys like to play with it and have some fun is you can keep them out, keep spraying it. Maybe you don't want them there right away. Maybe you want to wait till December to let them in.
Right.
You kind of have that option to where otherwise you don't really want to go out there in the middle of November and spend a whole day taking a fence down.
Right.
But if you run a UTV, they're kind of used to that stuff. So I got guys playing with it, and it's just really interesting. And we've had pretty good success overall. Like I said, half acre in the woods, good luck.
I mean, literally without something jabbing them or electrifying them, it's hard for me to believe there's anything in existence that truly stops them. And
nothing 100%.
But then in my mind, I'm going like, dude, even if you could reduce the browse pressure by 70%, right? Even if, instead of having 10 deer in there, you have 1.
Yeah.
Shit, that's a big difference. And I am with you. Once that soybean's even ankle-ish high, give or take, it's growing so fast, it's almost hard to overbrowse it if you're doing anything to deter them.
Correct. And if there's any other food around,
yeah,
why would they go in there and have to deal with that when they can just go 100 yards over there?
But that's distinctly on the smell of the product and whatever it's doing to change the taste because it's on the plant.
Correct.
Okay. I was just curious.
No, so like I said, we've had some pretty good luck in really playing with that, knowing your area, what other food's around, playing with that. What's beautiful is when guys got some staging plots with clover in it that's just right down the path. Beautiful. It works really good then.
Right.
So that's another product we got, and then our new product we're bringing to market this year, I'm super excited about it. it's going to help raise CEC.
Okay.
So I know you know what that means.
Yep.
So where it's super sandy, guys with sandy plots have really hard time growing stuff. They're going to have low organic matter, low CEC. And what CEC is, it's the ability to hold on to moisture and nutrients in your soil. So when you look at that category on your soil sample, you can tell just by looking at that what type of soil guys have. So if you're below 5, you're pretty sandy. 5 to 10, you're getting loamy. Above 10, you start working towards clay, right?
Yep.
So the biggest issue guys have with sandy soils, we're trying to build soil and do cover crops. Well, a lot of times we can't. Last 3 years with the drought, it's been
nothing
tough.
there, right?
Yeah. So if we can help to hold on to moisture and nutrients, maybe we can start growing a cover crop.
Yep.
But then once that gets up, and then we slowly start building organic matter, and it's just one of those things where it's not really an instant fix, but we can kind of instantly amend that soil to where we can now hold on to a little more moisture and nutrients and help that crop grow a little better.
Right.
So a lot of times guys want to throw, manure. Well, that's kind of nasty and not the easiest job in the world either.
Well, and you gotta be able to get it.
Correct.
Right. You got to get it, and you got to get it spread.
Yep.
So you're right. I mean, I'd love to put manure on all my plots, but it's not even a reality.
No. So now you can take a 50-pound bag of that. I love mixing it with rye because guys are overseeding rye in the fall.
Anyway.
Yeah. So just mix it right with that because most of the time with rye, you're doing 50, 100 pounds an acre. Yep. So you got your spreader wide open. You're just
letting it buck.
Letting it go. So if we can mix that with that, you can literally broadcast it, work it in. So if you're running summer cover crops, put it in the planter. We can do that. Put it in your broadcast
spreader.
It
can kind of go anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's super easy to apply. It's not that expensive.
Now, is that something, I guess, and this is out of curiosity, so I'm probably 50-50, Brad, on, like, if I'm planting brassicas, a lot of time I'm literally working the dirt, broadcasting, cultipacking, walking away, right? But a lot of the time I'm not. I'm using a drill. So say I was drilling brassicas or beans or, any of a cereal grain, can that product go right in the drill with the seed?
It can. We're playing with rates right now and opening sizes of that just to see how that works. But it could. Now, what I love about that is, how guys, like if you're spreading switchgrass or if you're broadcasting brassicas or clovers, that's small seed.
Tiny seed.
I cannot tell you how many times I've had guys that they come and buy a half-acre bag of clover. They come back the very next day because they only made it halfway.
Yeah.
Switchgrass is the worst because that's not cheap.
Correct.
And now you got too thick a switch, and them deer ain't going to use it.
Right.
So we're going to have that, so that way you can mix that with your seed as your kind of filler to help you to.
So it feeds properly.
Yep. Rather than using sand or just trying to come up with something to mix that with.
Peat moss we've used in the past, mixed in the drill with like native grass.
Yep.
Just to get the feed rate consistent, and that worked pretty good. But
that is cool, yeah.
And same thing. I mean, it's peat moss, dude. Like, all you're doing is bringing nature back to nature.
That's right.
So
that's why I'm super excited about that because they can use that as a tool to help to get that spread rate correct. That way, if you fill that spreader up and you only make it halfway, well, you only got half your seed in there.
Right.
We're good.
Well, I love that, too, because I'll bet the majority of food plots, at least brassica plots that get screwed up, you really can't screw clover up, let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
But brassicas get screwed up and overseeded all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't I get bulbs? I'm like, dude, because you got 17 plants per square foot.
They're all 4 inches tall, yellow and purple.
Right, yeah. What's wrong with that? Well, there's a lot wrong with it, but mostly it's how you planted it, right?
Oh, and it is hard. I mean, it is. If you're using a bag spreader or even a solo, I mean, a lot of times, I can't tell you how many times when I was younger, Dad gives you X amount of seed, and you're looking at it, you're like, geez, you start running with your seeder, and it's just like, this is not going to be good.
My rule of thumb was always, I got it down to a science on weighing my seed, and then sizing the food plot, and then sizing my bag perfectly to that food plot, with the goal of I'd rather make 2 passes than run out the first pass. So I honestly, and now I even do it by feel because I know it should damn near look like you're not spreading seed.
Oh, you can barely see it. A lot of times you're kind of tilting that to check that.
Yeah, and if the sun's just right, you might see it right, yeah.
But no, I think that's going to be a really good tool for guys for not only mixing that with those small seeds and helping that distribute evenly, But for those sandy soil guys,
Yeah.
we can slowly start raising that CEC and kind of think of that as like a spoon feed. Hey, over the next couple of years, as we're soil building,
this is
anyways,
a 3 to 5 year
just
thing.
throw a bag or two in that acre, and we'll just keep doing that until you get where you want.
Yep.
You know, it's basically just a soil amendment. So
Fair enough. I like that
super
product.
excited about it.
I'm excited about that one too. All right, so now we've covered the liquid stuff and the fertilizer. We've covered CEC and soil building. What else? I mean, let's talk trees. Let's talk miscanthus. Let's talk fruit plot seeds.
So seed, I'm partnered with Northwoods Whitetails. John's a really good guy. His business has been growing really good. The main thing I loved about him and kind of how this all got started, he didn't have any coating, didn't have a big fancy
Pure
buck on a
seed.
bag.
Yep.
So I know I'm not paying $5 just for that fancy bag.
Right.
And he was very knowledgeable. He didn't have a lot of junk in the bag. You know, I don't like the sugar beets in a fall brassica plot. That's not going to do nothing, right? That's not going to grow. There's not rye grass in any of that. That's something that's huge too. So he was just super straightforward. Here's what you're paying for. Here's what you're getting. No gimmicks, no BS. And I really like that. So we partnered with him for the seed. So we work together really well, and you can call him anytime.
Full disclosure, I will say, those sugar beets, in my opinion, in a Nebraska plot, I get it. You're not going to get the sugar beet.
You're not going to
like
get the bulb. You want the green.
Love the top.
You want the tops. I get that. That's fair.
But the shit's expensive, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah,
sugar
it's
beets
not
are expensive,
cheap.
right?
And I guess as long as guys know that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times that's not disclosed.
Right.
You know,
right.
here's sugar beets in your fall plot. That's
Right.
great. Well, no.
Right.
The greens, yeah. Like, I like fall planting soybeans too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's great. But as long as this isn't going to grow a bean.
Yeah, you're not going to get a crop.
Yep.
Right.
So that takes care of the seed. So trees, I mean, we got everything from spruce to oaks, chestnuts, fruit trees, just the whole ball of wax.
If you need trees, you're the guy.
Yep. We've probably already done over a dozen jobs of going in and building bedding areas with spruce.
Sure.
You know, we're hauling 5-6 foot spruce out there, planting little triangles inside of switchgrass and building those bedding areas, using miscanthus and spruce for windrows and blocking the road. And we just did a huge job where we put in a ton of oak trees, just kind of guy wanting to have that for his kids.
Sure.
And that's super cool. Marks for putting in an orchard there, and that's something like, hey, can you line that up so it's on my walk out and I can snag a couple apples as I'm heading out there? I'm like, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of options there.
Well, and even like I guess you bring up fruit trees, and same thing. I mean, that could be a podcast of its own.
Oh, 100%.
I think people generically go, "Oh, I want a Honeycrisp, or I want a whatever Red Delicious, or whatever the common edible apples."
Yep.
And the reality is, most of the time, those kind of varieties are going to fail.
And that's why I started that is because I went to TSC, went to Family Farm and Home. I went and bought fruit trees.
Got a deal on it, though.
Yep,
Yeah.
I was super pumped. They died right away.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, that's not the rootstock for my area. That's not the variety for my area. It's not going to work. It
won't handle this fungus that's going to attack it, or this rust that's going to attack it. Like, there's no thought.
Correct. So as we were doing that, and it was just like, this don't make no sense. So then mainly for the guys in Michigan and our northern climates, it was like, no, we need these varieties with this rootstock to just handle the winters, let alone grow fruit down the road.
Right.
Like, we were just at Mark's, and he's like, yeah, I want this orchard here. And I'm like, we got to get rid of all these cedars.
Yep.
I do not want a cedar anywhere close.
Yep.
And just going down that, just because a lot of people don't know. So when I can come in and, hey, let's get rid of these cedars, he's like, oh, I would have put an orchard in, and it would have been cedar rust all over.
And killed itself, basically.
Save them, yep. So like you said, that could be a podcast all in itself.
Yep.
Just all the fine
and it might
details.
be. I mean, this might be one of those things.
I mean, fruit tree pruning. Mm-hmm. Hey, I'm not getting no fruit. It's like, okay, well, let's figure this out.
I almost swore, like really swore, because I swear normally. But yeah, I mean, people don't understand the importance of the pruning, or even having the right tree and then pruning it, and how fast you can make an apple tree like badass.
Correct.
Yeah.
And well, maybe they bought a full-size fruit tree, but they're trying to prune it like a dwarf. I mean, go down the list of all the things that could go wrong.
Right.
Well, we can kind of fast-track you and get you on the right track.
Sure. Giant miscanthus. I mean, I know you touched on it as a screening mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think same thing. That's one of those products that seemingly got to be a big deal the last 4 or 5 years. And I've used it on. Well, you'll see some of it today when we're out tootling the farms, but. Good, bad, or indifferent? Because, I mean, it seems like there's some opinion.
Yeah, I think there's a time and a place for it.
Yeah.
And I use that like I use switchgrass screening. I think there's a time and a place for trying to use switch with screening.
Yeah.
And that's where it all depends. I mean, like, I want to say, it was February. We did a property plan for a guy. He literally has 30 feet of miscanthus. That's it, on the whole property. And it was like, hey, this will work the best there for what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And we'll use that until we can let some trees grow up.
Sure.
And that's it. So I think it's super specific. It can be an awesome tool.
Yeah.
But it definitely property
specific. I think it gets a bad rap because it is a very invasive species if it's not managed properly or you're not planting the right stuff to begin with. And I don't know enough about it to even attempt to speak like an expert, but I mean, my understanding is most of these varieties can be planted without a lot of risk of it being truly invasive because
Correct.
It's not going to spread.
Yep.
It's going to bush,
Yep.
but it's not going to spread.
Correct.
So,
and that's what I think too. We haven't had enough time
to really know. Right.
You know, there's a lot of things like, well, look at back in the day, they're like, oh, plant all these autumn olives. That'll be great.
Right.
Little unintended consequence there. So I think it's still fairly new. We don't really know what's going to happen.
Black locust is the other one that comes to mind.
Bradford pears in Ohio.
Oh, my God. Yeah. The list goes on and on, right.
Yeah. But, I think it's a really good tool for a lot of guys that we can basically have in 2-3 years a really nice screen.
Yep.
And if you want to plant them thick enough first year, we can fertilize that and get that going.
And from what I gather, it's pretty easy to terminate it.
And yes.
I mean, one wrong pass of I'm going to say it because we did it accidentally, but some of mine got jolted with a tank mix of Gly and Liberty.
Yep.
Gone.
It's
Toasted.
Yep. Absolutely.
So it wasn't like it was, there's weeds here that are hardier than miscanthus.
Oh, yeah. You probably got water hemp all over the place.
Yeah.
Oh, yep. It's
pigweed.
Much easier, yep.
So anyway, okay, giant miscanthus, you have it.
Yep.
What do we miss, Brad? I mean, we're going to try to wrap this up. I want to get out on the farms, man.
Yeah.
But
no, I think that's it. I mean, we got tree tubes. We got the one thing that is really cool, we switched over to a couple years ago, is the wraps. You've probably seen the plastic white wraps on all the fruit trees.
Yeah.
So you got to get out there, cut them things off, otherwise your trees get suffocated. You're still getting girdling in between those wraps. I mean, you still got a chance of that tree dying. So we got a mesh that grows with the tree.
Interesting.
You put it on there right away. It grows with the tree. You don't ever have to worry about it.
To deter the rodents from eating around.
Or the deer rubbing on them.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
That's
awesome.
an intriguing product for me as well.
So that's about it. That wraps us up. And like
that's
I said,
a lot of stuff.
Well, yeah.
So it's,
just real quick, wrap us up. I think it's the start to finish, and that's what I get from a lot of guys. Like, I love that I can just come here, have you walk me through my soil sample, give me everything I need, and I literally leave here with everything.
Yep.
We'll see you next year.
Yep. Use my recipe, and we'll check in next year. Yeah, I like that. Like I said, we are going to wrap this up. Brad, if two things. Number one, I want to make sure any of our UC Hunting Properties members realize that we do have a direct deal set up with you. Great program, saves the guy a little money. And oftentimes that can be passed down to their clients as well.
Yep.
So I want to make sure they understand it's a universal fix. Somebody wanting to get a hold of you, research Harper Growing Solutions, what's the best way for them to dig in and understand where you're at and how to do business with you?
So our website is harpergs.com.
harpergs.com. Yep.
You can find us on Facebook, Harper Growing Solutions. Instagram is Harper Growing.
Okay.
And then our email is customer.service.hgs@gmail.com.
Oh my God! Stop.
I know.
Just go to the website.
I'm not giving Google $15 to get my own thing. They're not getting it.
I get it, but I don't think anyone's going to translate. So Turtle, you're either putting that on the screen when this goes up, or just get them to your website.
Yeah, there you go. Have the guy throw my website, email, and phone number right on there. Just call me.
Right on. Well, let's go get our hands dirty, dude. I want to get in the field.
I'm excited to see
like
it.
I said, we'll spin it off from there.
That'll work.
Cool. Thanks, Brad.
Sounds good. Thanks.